This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Today's show begins with a grain market update where low prices and a lack of volatility plague the majority of the markets. K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien also shares information on increasing interest rates potential to impact agriculture and current world supply and demand balances minus China. Also ahead, a One Health-centered program is benefiting both Kansas community members and K-State veterinary students in impactful ways. Joining us today to discuss the community outreach course offered to fourth-year veterinary students is Community Outreach and Shelter Medicine Fellow Ron Orchard. This week's programming ends with an agricultural weather report from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip discusses 80-degree temperatures experienced by some this past week, somewhat slow to rise soil temperatures, and the end of the La Niña weather patterns we've experienced the last 3 years. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are beginning today's show with our grain market update for the week, and joining us for that, as always, is K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. So, Dan, before we get into things, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Samantha. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's start, as we always do, with futures and cash markets. Not a lot of volatility.
Well, not a lot of volatility, and we've been in a pattern. I'll kind of go commodity by commodity. Corn futures in the last week had fallen down to below 610 to about 608, have come back up to about 631. But we're really in a time frame when you look at kind of some weekly stats to where we just don't have a lot of volatility, where there's not a lot of worry about crop supply demand that's coming into the market, so that not really focusing much on Argentina shortfalls or even more reductions, because we're pretty confident apparently in the world market that the Brazilian corn crop will end up and be just fine. There's still some questions there. So you got the corn market having gone down to the lowest it had been since basically last July. But again, we're sitting here on the precipice in late March, getting into April of field work and suddenly starting to worry about the production side for corn. For soybeans, pretty similar situation. We'd seen, if anything, the strong run that we'd seen in soybean futures, where we'd gotten up to about $15.50, has seen us in the last several days fall off pretty sharply. $14.19 and a half, that'd be yesterday's closes. So that'd be for the May contract. So I guess still high prices, but to have lost over $1 here of late sure makes folks wonder. And again, we don't see a lot of volatility in these markets, flatlining in terms of weekly variations since basically last October, and it does raise the question, is there more risk in the market than that? So next WASDE reports will give us more information on both Brazil and Argentina. The Brazil number is probably larger. Argentine numbers probably lower, but I think the market's assuming those things are canceling themselves out. So we'll see whether that holds or not. But again, soybean production, planting coming in the next 30 to 45 days. So we're not far from bringing actual U.S. field work into play, and we'll see where the markets go then. And for wheat, Kansas being as strong as we are I guess strong in terms of importance in the wheat market, we've seen some moisture in the Northwest. We're breaking dormancy, some moisture in Northwest Kansas, still parts of the state, still pretty dry. I think that wheat futures, hard red winter wheat, had dropped down to about $7.75. This was about in the last week and a half. Closed yesterday at $8.19 and 3/4, had been over $9 to $9.10 or so just about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So you've got this consistent pattern in our major futures markets that are all pretty subdued, trending lower. Before we came on here, you and I talked about how seemingly economic pessimism, higher interest rates, brought on by the U.S. Fed in an effort to control inflation, and we certainly understand the reasons why they're doing that. All that said, though, higher interest rates impacting rural banks, probably impacting any buyers of these commodities that have to borrow money to hold them in inventory. So I think that's really a key issue, whether it's livestock feeders, whether it's exporters, whether it's ethanol producers. They buy inventories. If they have to hold them for any period of time and borrow money, well, they're paying higher interest rates. So it tends to throttle down the economy. And maybe in my lifetimes, this is a lesson we'll learn time and time again, that higher interest rates do affect business activity, and they do affect eventually, if not directly, at least indirectly, the cost of the commodities that we're involved in agriculture.
Sure. You were speaking to me beforehand, an example of that we saw in, not the exact same conditions that we have now, but similar conditions in 2008 were with grain elevators. They were quite limited during that time.
Well, yes, I guess I'm seasoned enough I can remember some of those things, having lived through them, where in essence we went to cash, and that's a shorthand for saying that no one could afford to hold inventories because of the uncertainty of things going forward. It wasn't necessarily interest rates then, just the uncertainty of the financial system functioning. So we really ran from inventories, and with that, the grain markets, I don't want to use just hyperbole and say crashed, but boy, it's hard not to call it that. They fell off very sharply. It took a little bit of time to regain confidence to be able to function. That thankfully was a temporary situation because, again, eventually we had, for the sake of producing food, of feeding livestock, et cetera, we had to start functioning. But when you get a big enough financial shock to the system, it affects, again, all the integrated business structures up and down these ag supply chains, and does end up and slow down or inhibit the cost of corn, of soybeans, of wheat, and grain sorghum, and all the rest.
Absolutely. Of course, those are our major commodities here in Kansas that we're talking about, too. So, of course, that means that we get impacted here in our state on an agricultural level. And like we said, our conditions are not the same as they were in 2008. So optimism is still a bit higher than those situations that we've previously seen in the past. So here's hoping that something like that doesn't happen again.
Well, that's right. It is something for us to watch on in agriculture. That the big interest rate shock came in the farm crisis years, when inflation had been running strong for about a decade, and there came a need to raise interest to, quote, stop that inflation, or really foreign currency holders of U.S. currencies were threatening to, as I understand it, not, I guess, hold those currencies as they were, which would have dire consequences. So there's a story behind it. Point is that interest rates affect agriculture both on the financing at the local farm level and in how the markets function.
Absolutely. And like you said, we'll keep a close eye on that. But something else we're keeping a close eye on, you kind of hinted at this earlier, is the world supply and demand that we see. And like you mentioned, a new WASDE report will be dropping soon. So we'll talk about this further then, of course. But right now, you kind of wanted to discuss today the world supply and demand balances that we see with China removed from the equation, really. Yeah.
Well, when you look at corn, wheat, and soybeans, we tend to look at world supply-demand balances in terms of the world, but then the world minus China. And when you look at corn first, we're looking at about an estimate about 296.5 million metric tons, which for us doesn't mean much. What's the scale? But it comes down to about 25.6% stocks to use. And the 9-year low is about 25.4, just under that. We've been basically going sideways at just about minimum levels for several years. That's all world stocks together. When you take China out, then that 296 minus China drops to 87. So China has a huge impact on world corn supply demand balance sheet numbers. So the 10-year low is about 10.1%. That happened in 2020. We're just slightly above that, 10.37. So again, we've got down to low levels or going sideways. So when I referenced our previous discussion, we were wondering about factors leading to low prices, but yet we're still sitting in this tight stock situation. For wheat, really a concerning situation in wheat markets. I guess our current ending stocks figures are at about 34% stocks to use, and that's an 8-year low. That's all the world. If you take China out, we're below 20%. That's a 15-year low. So I understand the concerns about the wheat. We're not seeing a lot of volatility, but we're looking at a situation where if we had any hiccups, we'd still be extremely tight at recent record lows, and it'd bring volatility to the market. The market would have to respond. But right now, that's not on its radar. And I would say for soybeans, the current ending stocks minus China are at about 25.5% stocks to use, and that's a 9-year low. So again, you're looking at situations where we're at multi-year lows or quite near them for all these major commodities. One thing, I guess there is a bright spot. It may kind of bemoaning things. We've had some movement in grain sorghum exports of late. And when you look, as we look at forward contract bids and cash prices for sorghum in some areas in our export-oriented parts of the state, they've been doing quite well. In fact, I would say new crop bids in Topeka for sorghum at 522 are equal with corn, and that's a relatively new development. The cash bids, and well, also in Topeka, cash bids for corn 667, 666 for sorghum. So when you see that happening, somebody's getting involved with filling trains, or they're trying to amass grain together so they can ship it out. And the recent USDA export numbers for sorghum have been pretty positive. They've been jumping up. So, sorghum had been underpriced, and if you see, when we start thinking about, well, who has been buying sorghum in the past? Well, it's been China. So I think we'll need more verification as to who is actually coming in and buying sorghum and kind of upping the situation. But I don't think anybody in Kansas that grows grain sorghum is begrudging the situation to where their prices are doing decently now. And hopefully, as grain sorghum would go and tighten up feed grains in Kansas, well, that helps corn too.
Sure, yeah. An interesting situation that you don't see play out a lot. So an interesting situation for sure.
Yep. And perhaps next week we can talk more about some of the basis trends that we're seeing. I think they've been reflecting some of the sideways to lower sentiments. But again, so we're here in late March. Give us about 3 or 4 weeks. Planters are rolling. Things are moving around. And then in 6 or 7 weeks, we'll come back in mid-May and take a look at these markets and see if they're still paying attention to the same factors that they are now. My thoughts would be same financial factors will still be there probably, but then we'll have in-the-field concerns, and that's probably going to bring some more volatility to the market.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, it sounds like we have a few interesting weeks ahead of us here soon, but as always, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Samantha. Take care.
You as well. Once again, everyone, that was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien joining us for this week's grain market update. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by one of our friends from K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine. His name is Ron Orchard, and he serves as the Community Outreach and Shelter Medicine Fellow at K-State's College of Vet Med. And today we're going to be talking about an amazing program for our fourth-year vet students here at K-State. And it's a community outreach course that has some benefits for, obviously, our community members, but the students themselves as well. So, Ron, before we get into things, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me be here. I'm very excited.
Well, I'm super excited to have you and super excited to discuss this program. It's the first full year of this program coming up, but it's been a long time in the making.
Yeah, that's true. So I have been here at K-State going on 8 years, and I originally came out to help set up the shelter medicine course with my mentor, Dr. Brad Crower. And ever since we set foot here on the campus at K-State with this program for shelter medicine, we knew we wanted to expand the reach and develop a course like this community outreach course.
Yeah, so let's talk about this course. It's really impressive. And like I mentioned before, it's for fourth-year vet students. So tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so essentially what the course is I've have a big purple school bus, kind of, and we travel the state and provide essential veterinary services for folks who don't have the means to receive those services themselves. So a lot of times what this means is that we're traveling the state, so we'll be here in Manhattan, in Shawnee County, in the Kansas City area, and expanding in May. But the students travel with me for a week, and we are partnered with mostly human-facing organizations. So this could be social workers, human medical practitioners, mental health professionals, or some things that are just as essential as one of our partners has a shower truck and laundry truck. So it's really just getting together all the essential services that these clients would need.
Wow, wonderful. So it's a really One Health-centric program then.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's extremely One Health. That's really what the overlying theory is that brings all of these practitioners together, because what we see from some of my research that I did, because I completed a Master's of Public Health here at K-State, what we see is when these interdisciplinary teams work together, it improves outcomes for all parties.
Absolutely. Yeah. Impressive to say the least. And really one of the big themes here is that when you're providing this veterinary care to these individuals, animals, you're also building trust with them, right?
Yes. Yeah, you absolutely got it totally right. That's a lot of what motivates us. And if I was to bring in some of my other partners that would be there, so, whether it's Via Christi is a big partner, so Human Medical Services, they would absolutely say that. They'd say the trust that we develop and build with these clients because we're loving or caring for maybe the only thing that person has in this world at that point in time, because a lot of our clients are experiencing housing difficulty or homeless, as we would historically say. And so it takes a lot to build that trust. And so that's why we are typically welcomed with open arms by a lot of these different professions where you wouldn't necessarily think you'd see an MD practicing right alongside a DVM, but it does happen here in the state of Kansas.
Absolutely incredible. And we were talking beforehand, and you really emphasized the importance of the human-animal bond in these situations and how that really allows for that trust to be built.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the motivation for myself and Dr. Crowder to build a program like this. We're fortunate enough to have come through the animal sheltering world, and there was a time when we couldn't have taken that animal-human bond for granted. We'd seen many clients similar financial circumstances to those that we serve with this program and placed in pretty difficult situations where maybe their animal acquired some urgent medical need that needed care. And if they didn't have the services for it, the only way we could provide services would be by basically asking them to relinquish their animal. So removing that human-animal bond. So that's a really important emphasis of this course is everyone's worthy of that human-animal bond, and especially those who need it the most, like some of these neighbors who we work with.
Of course, this is obviously benefiting the communities that you're working in, but it's also benefiting your students in a lot of ways, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine this. We're here on the K-State campus, just a block from the veterinary teaching hospital, and we provide excellent, amazing services there at the veterinary hospital, the teaching hospital here at K-State. We have specialists who really focus on certain diagnostic modalities or certain disease processes. The majority of our students may not ever reach that specialty of veterinary medicine. A lot of them will be general practitioners, so just the same place you may take your own dog or cat here in town. And so what this gives them is an additional opportunity to practice just that type of medicine, as well as it gives them the additional challenge of how do we practice that type of medicine when we're in a resource-limited situation, whereas a lot of our clients will have very little to no money. And so how do we still have a positive outcome in those situations?
Working with limited resources is always a challenge for veterinarians, I feel like, in the real world, like we talk about. Absolutely. So this is a great opportunity to learn those skills.
Yes, it definitely is. And it's one of our most important aspects with teaching this course. There's a new philosophy in veterinary medicine that we call spectrum of care, which is essentially how do we establish a goal standard of care? Because so long we use the term gold standard, like a gold bar. And we're seeing that that's not a one-size-fits-all is not necessarily the way we should approach medicine and the way we practice. And it should really be more relational. And how do we find out what's going on in the client's lives and the barriers they may encounter and how best we can prepare our students for situations like that. And this course is one of those ways.
Talk about strengthening communication skills, too, because these are hard conversations that these vet students are sometimes having to have in these situations.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. That's one of the things I'm most proud about. With one of our partners, we're able to really take our time, and it's one of my favorite days of the course because we have a partner in Topeka that we meet up with, and I get to have the opportunity to tell the students, you can take as much time as you need, which would be different in a common veterinary practice, in order to pay the bills, you probably have 15-minute appointments, if that. But what we find, just like we talked about with those other practitioners, we can be that first, brick in that bridge by spending some time with these clients and really talking them through and finding out what barriers and issues they're currently dealing with. And then we can also have other difficult conversations like what things they need to take care of themselves. So whether it be the mental health screenings, help with housing, or maybe even something as basic as getting a vaccine for themselves.
So when you're thinking about the students that are walking away this semester, after this first year, it must be really fulfilling at the end of it.
Oh my gosh, you're telling me. I was tearing up. I was so excited after, I think it was like our first set of evaluations we got from students, and they said, this is the most important course. I never knew I needed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not crying, you're crying. But it's one that we believe will really have a lasting impact with these students, which is why we've been given this support from the College of Vet Med. We're increasing the frequency of the course, so it's going to be twice as often now. So not only does that benefit the students that we're talking about, now I'm going to be able to get twice as many students to come through this course, but that also means we're going to be out in the communities twice as much, so benefiting everyone.
Absolutely. And from what I understand, as this program is continuing on, you're also doing some research related to it as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so at these sites, I'll spend that time to also capture data from the clients and really the interactions with the students. So we're looking at a couple things. One is, what are some ways we can coach our students in order to really handle those difficult conversations and communications best? And so we're at that point, and then we're going to next elevate that program to then capture data directly from the clients. And so finding out how these interactions work for them, ways that we can improve our practice as veterinarians and public health practitioners. And then the third layer is really looking at it from like a systems approach. So how do we have these such contrasting disciplines? How is it that we're able to work together at such a smooth clip and have a positive impact in that community?
Absolutely. Well, a wonderful program to say the least. And I myself am so excited to continue to watch this program flourish because, like we said, it's really just the first semester. So it can only go up from here, really.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really excited to see the future of this program. My goal would be that every veterinary student eventually takes it. And the big dream, even bigger than that, would be that every veterinarian has taken a course like this. So not just at K-State. And by having such a powerful product here at K-State and the research will eventually be publishing, I think we have a clear path to get there.
Absolutely. And if listeners are tuning in and they're interested in learning more about the program or maybe even, seeing it in action, where can they do that at?
Yeah, so they can go to the College of Vet Med website. I know we're under some construction for that, but that's one way. We also have an Instagram page for K-State Shelter Med, so it's just KSU Shelter Med. Those are some of the best ways that we get our work out there.
Absolutely. Well, Ron, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, Samantha. Thank you so much. I appreciate it too.
Absolutely. Once again, everyone, that was the Community Outreach and Shelter Medicine Fellow at K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine, Ron Orchard, joining us for a discussion on the Community Outreach Program for fourth-year vet students here at K-State. If you're listening to us on the radio and are afraid you're going to miss out on our next segment because you're reaching your destination or have something else that you're having to switch to quickly here, don't forget that Agriculture Today programming is also available as a podcast. Our podcast is easily accessible on all podcasting platforms, including our website, agtoday.net, as well as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. You can simply search us on any podcasting platform, Agriculture Today, Kansas State, and we are more than likely to pop up and you can follow us there. That way you can simply have us pop up in your regular feed on whatever platform you're using and listen to us more regularly that way. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are ending today's show with this week's agricultural weather report. And joining us for that, as always, is our K-State meteorologist, Chip Redmond. So, Chip, thanks for being here.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start with kind of an overview of the past week. It was an eventful week, especially here in Manhattan with fire.
Yeah, it was very windy. Wind. And yeah, we did have one fire that was south of Manhattan, and there were several other large fires across the state of Kansas. I know a notable one in Kingman County. So fire season's been pretty quiet year to date. In fact, before this week, we had no large fires reported. Last I knew, there were at least 2, potentially 3 that have been reported now. So we are in our peak period of fire season. Why? Because, well, we have the wind this time of year. Last week was no exception, where we saw wind gusts 40 to 50 mile an hour, lots of blowing dust, especially to our west, and just a really unpleasant time despite temperatures being moderate at times. We saw temperatures up to the 60s in the Manhattan area. As you got further south and west, they were higher. We even hit a couple 80-degree marks. which is not necessarily what the wheat farmers want to see, because we would really like to get some moisture, and hot temperatures usually are associated with wind and dry conditions, which yield fire.
Absolutely. And those dry conditions, that's what we've seen play out in the last week or so, right?
Yeah, we started the year pretty optimistic for eastern Kansas standards, and we were pretty well above normal, but we've really tapered off, and precipitation amounts have been mostly restricted along the Missouri state line, and except for that little corner of the Northwest that got a lot of snow in January. But we've really dried out, and we're talking up to a month in places, especially central Kansas, that they haven't seen a quarter inch of moisture. And most of the state is running below average for March to date.
I know that we've had some, I guess, fairly cool, dry conditions, but our soil temperatures have been influenced by this weather.
Yeah, we were talking a few weeks ago, soil temperatures were already approaching that 50-degree mark in southern Kansas, and some folks were just, they're ready. They're ready to go. They got their planters ready, and unfortunately, with this recent cooler weather, yeah, we have had some warmer days, but we've had some cooler days as well. And overall, our average temperature month to date has been 2 to 3 degrees below normal, even as much as 5 degrees below normal when we get further north and west. And that, as a result, has impacted soil temperatures, and they've gone downhill. And they're still in the mid-40s, but that's about 4 to 5 degrees cooler than what they were 2 weeks ago. So folks hopefully didn't get too aggressive with planting. And even if they did, we haven't had moisture, so the rot probably isn't a significant issue at this point. But they'll gradually climb back up. It's springtime, and we see that ebb and flow typical.
Producers are eager to get out there, and I can't blame them myself. I'm looking forward to spring. And looking forward in the outlooks, I guess models have come up, and they're not too optimistic for April, right?
Yeah, they're not aggressive on the moisture side, at least. We see some light at the end of the tunnel with this persistent pattern. California keeps getting slammed with moisture, and those systems kind of keeps passing over the central part of the U.S. and then dropping a lot more moisture again in the Missouri River Valley. But we hope to see that transition into more of a maybe slower pattern, which might not necessarily be a good thing, because our precipitation chances will become less as we get into early April. And the models seem to be buying into that and saying that with La Niña on the back end and maybe some residual effects still hanging in there of the dry conditions that will likely emerge in April.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fair to say La Niña is officially over?
Yeah, they put the stamp on that last week. And keep in mind, just because La Niña is officially over because the ocean temperatures have actually warmed, doesn't mean that the impacts are gone. It impacts the weather globally, and it's kind of like a butterfly flapping his wings in South Africa. It takes a while for that ripple effect to occur. And there's a lot of other things at play. Typically, ENSO, which is La Niña, El Niño, tends to play the least part of our weather as you get into the summertime and is the least influencer. So don't expect huge results unless we really flip the lid and go the opposite way to El Nino. And there are some models that buy into that. And as quickly as we've warmed our ocean temperatures, definitely a little bit of concern that we could start to swing towards El Nino quicker than expected.
Absolutely. Well, something we'll watch for sure and keep you all listening updated on. But Chip, as always, thanks for joining us.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, everyone, that was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond joining us for this week's Agricultural Weather Report. That concludes this week's programming. We'll be back with more on Monday on Agriculture Today.